The moment the words left Kyong Hun's mouth, Jiun recoiled as though he'd been struck. His eyes, wide and trembling, searched Kyong Hun's face for any hint that this was some kind of twisted joke. But it wasn't. The silence between them buzzed with disbelief. "You're marrying Min Seo?" Jiun said slowly, his voice cracking. "Just like that?" Kyong Hun winced. "Jiun. No, explain yourself." Jiun took a step forward, anger rising in his chest. "You don't get to stand there and say my name like that. Like I'm just supposed to understand this, betrayal." "I didn't make this decision lightly," Kyong Hun said, his voice low and heavy. "I'm not doing this because I want to." "Then why?" Jiun shouted. "Why her? Why now?" Kyong Hun inhaled sharply, like bracing himself against a gust of wind. "Because, my father is making me king." Jiun blinked. The words didn't register at first. "What?" "I'm going to be king," Kyong Hun repeated. "After the wedding." Ji-yun's fury faltered, confusion replacing it. "But why is he making you king? And what does this have to do with marrying Min Seo?" Kyong Hun's jaw tensed. "Because Jin Suk has the royal family in a stranglehold. Years ago, my father made a deal with him. A deal that cost the former royal family their lives. Jin Suk ran a secret trade, abducting our own people, children, families, and selling them to the Yin Empire. And my father knew, he even worked with him. He let it happen, and because he owed Jin Suk, there was nothing he could do to stop it." Ji-yun stood still, silent, the color slowly draining from his face. Kyong Hun went on, his voice now quieter, more strained. "That's why no one could touch Jin Suk for all these years. That's why justice never came. And now, he's threatening to expose it all if Min Seo doesn't marry into the royal family. If he does, the entire monarchy falls. Chaos would follow." Ji-yun looked away, his hands trembling. "So you marry his daughter, and he stays quiet?" "No," Kyong Hun stepped closer. "I'm not doing this for my parents. They don't deserve that kind of loyalty. I'm doing this for the children at that orphanage. For every family that was torn apart. For everyone who was left with questions and grief because of men like my father and Jin Suk." He placed a hand gently on Ji-yun's arm. "If I become king, I'll have the power to dismantle everything Jin Suk built. To bring those people home. To stop it from happening ever again. I grew up watching my father's cruelty," Kyong Hun continued, voice thick with emotion. "I watched how the people who starved while he held feasts. I swore to myself that I would be nothing like him. I wanted to rule with compassion. With justice. But I can't do that from the shadows. As prince, I can't protect anyone. But as king, I can change everything." There was a long silence between them. A silence that said more than words ever could. Finally, Ji-yun looked up, his expression unreadable. "And what about me?" Kyong Hun's eyes softened. "Min Seo means nothing to me. She never has. She's tried for years to win my affection and failed. This marriage is only a facade. A necessary step to keep Jin Suk close until I can destroy his empire. Once I do, I'll divorce her. Let her live her own life, free of her father's shadow." Ji-yun's lips parted, as if to say something, but he didn't. Instead, he shook his head and said quietly, "I want to go." Kyong Hun stepped forward again. "Ji-yun, please." "No," Ji-yun pulled away. "I need to leave. I need air. I need space." He turned and began walking toward the carriage. The children playing nearby paused, sensing the tension. One of the little ones, a girl with a ribbon in her hair, ran up to him and tugged on his sleeve. "Princess, are you sad?" she asked innocently. "Did something bad happen?" Ji-yun forced a small smile, kneeling briefly. "Nothing's wrong, dear. We just have to go for now. But we'll be back, okay? I promise. She nodded reluctantly, and Jiun gently patted her head before rising and stepping into the carriage. Just as Kyong Hun turned to follow, Tae-jin appeared from around the corner, his eyes darting between his brother and the carriage. I take it things didn't go well, he asked quietly. Kyong Hun's shoulders slumped. No. I told him everything. But. Tae-jin placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. Sometimes, the truth hurts more than the lies. But if your bond is real, it won't break so easily. Disputes happen. Especially between people who love each other. Kyong Hun sighed heavily. I didn't want to hurt him like this. Tae-jin nodded. And yet, you had to. Now you just have to be strong enough to wait until he's ready to understand. After a pause, Tae-jin added, mind if I ride back with you? I wanted to speak with the palace guards, see if there's any update about those assassins. Their deaths were too convenient. Kyong Hun nodded distractedly. I want to know too, but... Tae-jin gave him a look. Focus on Jiun. The rest can wait. The ride back to the palace was anything but peaceful. Inside the carriage, silence sat between them like a third passenger, heavy and uncomfortable. The sound of wheels crunching gravel and the distant clip-clop of hooves were the only reminders that time hadn't frozen. Tae-jin, seated with Ji-yun and Kyung Hun, and cleared his throat, glancing between the two. Well, he said lightly, trying to slice through the tension. It's cold in here, and I'm not talking about the weather. No one laughed. Ji-yun stared out the window, arms crossed tightly. Kyung Hun looked like he wanted to say something, then did. Ji-yun, he started, voice low, cautious. Can we just... I have nothing to say to you, Ji-yun cut him off flatly, not even turning his head. Kyung Hun's jaw tightened. Nothing to say? Really? Silence. He snapped, then why are you giving me the silent treatment? I opened up to you. I explained everything. Ji-yun turned then, eyes flashing. And that makes it better, he shot back. You just decided all on your own to marry her. You didn't even think about what it would do to me. I did think about you, Kyung Hun snapped. Why do you think I told you the truth? If I didn't care, I would have kept it to myself and played the part until the wedding was over. Ji-yun scoffed. So what now? Are you going to keep playing the part? How many more wives are you planning to take after her, Your Majesty? Kyung Hun's hands clenched into fists. Is that really what you think of me? His voice cracked with anger. That I'd just collect wives like trinkets? That I'd toss you aside? I just want us to be honest with each other. Kyung Hun leaned forward, eyes burning. I am being honest here, but I can't say the same about you, Ji-yun. Don't act like I'm the one keeping secrets. You've never even told me why you came to the palace in the first place disguised as a woman. Or what it is you're really running from. Ji-yun's face twisted with anger. That's different. No, it's not. Kyung Hun cut in. I've been patient with you. I've waited, hoping one day you'd trust me enough to open up. But you never did. And now you're acting like I'm the one being dishonest. The words hung in the air, sharp and raw. Stop the carriage, Ji-yun said suddenly, his voice cold and firm. Tae-jin's head jerked up as he turned around. Wait, what? I said stop the damn carriage. Ji-yun barked. Ji-yun, Tae-jin said, trying to reason, you shouldn't. It's fine, Kyung Hun said, raising a hand to stop his brother. His expression was hard. Let him go. The carriage rolled to a slow stop in front of Ji-yun's modest home. Ji-yun stepped down without a glance back. Not a word. Not even a flicker of hesitation. The door closed behind him with finality. Kyung Hun leaned back in his seat, jaw tight. Driver, he said harshly, ride on. As the carriage started moving again, Jiun looked over at his brother, frowning. "You're really going to let him walk away like that?" he asked quietly. Kyong Hun didn't look at him. "I don't want to talk about it." Jiun studied him for a long moment, then simply nodded. "All right," he said. "Then let's focus on what we can deal with. Like who the hell killed those assassins?" Kyong Hun said, his gaze fixed out the window, but his reflection in the glass betrayed everything he was trying to hide: hurt, frustration, and something dangerously close to heartbreak. Meanwhile, Jiun stood still in front of his gate, the wooden structure worn from years of weather and time. He stared at it, hands limp at his sides, eyes clouded with emotion. This house, this cursed house, had always felt more like a cage than a home. For as long as he could remember, he dreamed of running far from it, far from Sungmin and the memories tied to these walls. And yet, in this moment, it was the only place in the world that didn't feel like it was spinning out of control. He pushed open the gate slowly and stepped into the compound. Sungmin was outside, chatting with Hyun. The two men looked up in unison, surprised at the unexpected sight of Jiun walking in. "What in the heaven's name are you doing here?" Sungmin said, raising a brow. "Did you fight with the prince?" Jiun didn't even look at him. "I'm tired," he muttered. "I just want to rest." Without another word, he brushed past them and went inside. A moment later, the door to his room slammed shut. Hyun glanced at Sungmin, concerned. "That didn't look good." Sungmin exhaled slowly. "No, it didn't." Hyun gave his shoulder a light pat. "I'll leave you to it. Let me know if you need anything." When Hyun left, Sungmin stood there a while, arms folded, head slightly tilted. Something wasn't right. Jiun hated this house. He would have never come home unless he had to, and certainly not looking that pale and drained. Quietly, he stepped closer to Jiun's door. At first, there was silence. Then, a sound. Soft at first. A choked breath. Then a stifled sob. And then the unmistakable sound of Jiun crying. Sungmin froze. His son wasn't someone who cried easily. Whatever had happened, it had broken something in him. He stayed outside the door, unsure whether to knock, speak, or just listen. His expression, usually guarded and stern, shifted into one of deep concern. "What happened, Jiun?" he whispered. "At the palace." The air in Kyong Hun's quarters was thick with tension. The courtiers, servants, and guards moved more carefully than usual, like mice in a room with a sleeping tiger. Everyone sensed it. The prince was in no mood for patience. Kyong Hun sat at the head of the room, staring down at a scroll in his hand without actually reading it. His jaw was clenched, and his knuckles were white from gripping the armrest too tightly. He looked up suddenly, eyes sharp. "Where's Min Suk?" he asked. A servant bowed quickly. "Your Highness, I believe he's not in the palace at the moment." Kyong Hun slammed his hand on the table so hard the inkwell rattled. "Of course he's not. He's never here when he's needed." The room fell even quieter, if possible. "Listen closely," he snapped, standing. "The moment Min Suk steps foot in this palace, he is to meet me at the prison. Immediately." "Yes, Your Highness," the servant said before rushing out in a panic. Kyong Hun turned to the guards. "Gather every single one of the men who were on duty the day of the assassination. I want them all in the prison before nightfall." The guards bowed and left in haste. Jiun, who had been quietly watching from the side, finally spoke. "Brother," he said carefully, "your anger is spreading like wildfire. You're scaring everyone." Kyong Hun looked at him, eyes narrowed. "Good. That's not what I meant," Jiun said gently. "You're not thinking clearly right now. Maybe take a moment. Breathe." But Kyong Hun shook his head, already striding toward the door. "I don't have the luxury of breathing, Jiun. We have a lot to do. Jiun stepped back, watching his brother disappear into the hallway. He sighed heavily, knowing he was in for a long day. Meanwhile, the throne room, bathed in the glow of late afternoon light, was unusually quiet, save for the low murmur of conversation between the king, queen, minister Jin Suk, and Min Seo. The air was thick with unspoken calculations. We have decided to make Min Seo the prince's royal concubine, the queen said, her voice measured, yet firm. A title of dignity and proximity. Although she isn't crown princess, it secures the alliance and honors your family. The king nodded in agreement. Kyong Hun has already given his consent. That statement landed heavily in the room. Jin Suk's lips twitched slightly, and his brows pulled together. That wasn't part of the plan, he said, the edge in his voice barely concealed. We spoke of marriage. Of making her the crown princess. Min Seo glanced sideways at her father, not saying a word but clearly tense. I understand your disappointment, the queen replied, calm as ever, but the situation has shifted. This path is more immediate, especially because the prince will not yield to divorce his current wife. Jin Suk stood, crossing his arms. His gaze flicked to the king. And this is truly the prince's will? It is, the king said with certainty. He agreed. After a pause, Jin Suk exhaled, his face unreadable. Then, so be it. Min Seo, perfectly composed, nodded once. I will do my duty. But before the moment could settle, Jin Suk leaned forward, voice lowering. I trust, your majesty, that there are no surprises left. No, tricks. The king met his eyes evenly. None. You have my word. Jin Suk held the king's gaze a second longer before offering a thin smile. Then we have a deal. With that, he and Min Seo rose and left the throne room. They had barely made it halfway down the corridor when they saw Kyong Hun approaching from the opposite direction, Jin close behind. Kyong Hun's expression was unreadable, cold. As they passed, he didn't spare Jin Suk or Min Seo so much as a glance. Jin, caught in the middle, gave Min Seo a brief but unmistakable glance. Something quiet flickered in it. Whatever it was, Min Seo caught it, but said nothing as Jin followed Kyong Hun. Jin Suk, on the other hand, was seething. That boy, he hissed under his breath, watching Kyong Hun's back retreat. So full of arrogance. One day, he'll regret looking down on me like this. Min Seo kept her voice soft. What now? This is still a victory, Jin Suk said, his tone hardening. You may not be crown princess yet, but you're inside the palace now. Close enough to reach the throne. All we need to do is remove the final obstacle. He turned to her, his voice quiet and sharp. Jialmi. That girl has no business near the prince. Once she's gone, there will be no one left to block your path. Min Seo's expression didn't waver. I'll do whatever you need me to do, father. Jin Suk smiled faintly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Good. But tell me, have you noticed anything strange about her? Anything we could use? Min Seo shook her head. No, she seems ordinary. Then leave it to me, he said. You just focus on the wedding. Everything else will fall into place. They continued walking, shadows stretching ahead of them. At the prison. The atmosphere was suffocating. Thick with tension, the prison walls seemed to close in tighter with every barked word from Prince Kyong Hun. The guards stood stiff and pale, their heads bowed as Kyong Hun paced furiously in front of them. His sharp voice cracked through the air like a whip. How, he snapped, glaring at the assembled soldiers, how do you lose track of what happens in a cell? No one dared answer. You call yourselves royal guards, he went on, voice rising. You wear the uniform, you take the pay, but clearly, you aren't worth either. Not one of you is worthy of protecting the royal family. The two men who had been on duty the night of the murder looked ready to crumble under the weight of his words. One swallowed hard. The other blinked rapidly, struggling to keep tears from spilling. Kyong Hun wasn't just scolding them, he was tearing through every shred of dignity they had left. "If a killer can walk right out under your noses," he said, voice trembling with fury, "then you might as well open the gates to every enemy of the crown. We'd be safer without you." Jiun, standing slightly behind him, leaned in and whispered, "Brother, maybe, ease up. They're shaken already." But Kyong Hun didn't seem to hear. His anger was boiling too close to the surface, anger that had very little to do with the soldiers in front of him. Just then, the heavy doors creaked open. Min Suk strode in, one arm still bandaged and moving stiffly from his injury. Kyong Hun turned sharply, eyes flaring. "You're late." Min Suk blinked, caught off guard. "What? Where the hell have you been?" Kyong Hun thundered. "You're never in the palace when it matters. You just disappear. What are you even doing with your position?" Min Suk raised both hands defensively. "Your Highness, I'm still recovering. I had a doctor's appointment this morning, you knew I was injured." That seemed to finally pull Kyong Hun back, just slightly. He paused, jaw clenched, his breathing heavy. His shoulders slumped a fraction, but his eyes still burned. Min Suk studied him for a beat, then turned to Jiun with a quiet voice. "What happened?" Jiun hesitated. He and Jiun had a fight because Kyong Hun is taking Min Seo as his concubine, he finally said. It was so serious that Jiun went back to his own house. Min Suk blinked in disbelief. "Oh my goodness. But why would Kyong Hun want to marry Min Seo?" "It's complicated," Jiun said quietly, watching Kyong Hun as he turned away from the guards. "Regardless, it was bad. And until they make up this," he motioned to the prince, who was now standing by the wall, fists clenched, "is what we're going to keep getting." Min Suk sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "So we're not just chasing a murderer," he muttered. "We're chasing one while the prince slowly loses his mind." Jiun nodded grimly. "Exactly." They both looked toward Kyong Hun, who stood still now, staring into the shadows of the prison as if he was hoping they could swallow his frustration whole. That evening, outside Ji-yun's bedroom door, Sungmin stood stiffly, a covered tray in his hands. The air was quiet, heavy with the kind of silence that made his ears ring. He knocked, again. "Ji-yun," he called, voice gruff but not entirely unkind. "Open this damn door. You need to eat. Don't make me stand out here." No response. "I have no patience for this sulking," he added, irritation creeping in. "You're not a child anymore." The door creaked open, slowly. Ji-yun stood there, pale and hollow-eyed. His hair was slightly mussed, and there was a dull emptiness in his expression that made Sungmin falter for just a second. Then Ji-yun spoke, voice flat. "Kyong Hun is taking Min Seo as his second wife." Sungmin blinked. "What?" "He's going to be king," Ji-yun added dully, like it was just another inconvenience to mention. "Apparently, marrying her is part of the deal." Sungmin's brows furrowed in confusion, then anger. "What the hell are you talking about? Since when was that decided? And why her, of all people?" Ji-yun glanced away, his shoulders slumping slightly. "To stop Jin Suk's kidnapping operation." That made Sungmin pause. "Jin Suk. He's behind the abductions," Ji-yun said. "He was also the one who spurred the king into eliminating your family so that his kidnapping operations wouldn't be discovered. Everything that happened, he was mostly responsible." Sungmin stared, his grip tightening around the tray. Ji-yun continued. "He destroyed our family," he said quietly. "He's the real enemy." Sungmin took a step back as if the weight of Ji-yun's words physically struck him. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. His face paled. The silence between them stretched long and thin. Then Jiun took a deep breath, as if preparing to throw one last stone into the already shattered glass. "And Kyong Hun knows I'm a man." The words landed like a final blow. Sungmin's mouth moved again, but no sound came. He looked at Jiun like he didn't recognize him anymore, like he was seeing him for the first time. Jiun gave a small, bitter smile. "It doesn't matter now, does it?" He turned and walked down the hall, leaving Sungmin frozen in place, food forgotten in his hands, and a storm unraveling quietly behind his eyes. Outside the prison, the air was thick with tension as Tae-jin and Min-suk trailed behind Kyung Hun. The prince's stormy silence made even the sound of their footsteps feel too loud. Neither of them dared speak until they were a good distance from the prison gates. "Have all the servants on duty during the murder been accounted for?" Kyung Hun shouted. "Not yet, Your Highness." Min-suk stammered. "Then why the delay? Do you want until they have destroyed evidence before we make our move?" Silence. Finally, Tae-jin let out a quiet breath and broke the silence. "Your Highness, if I may." Kyung Hun didn't stop walking, but he glanced over his shoulder, signaling Tae-jin to go on. Tae-jin hesitated before speaking, carefully choosing his words. This thing with Ji-yun. You're angry. Hurt. I get it. But holding it all in and punishing everyone around you won't help. You're not the only one who wants to get to the bottom of things." Kyung Hun's jaw clenched. "I know you love him," Tae-jin continued gently. "And I know you're angry that he doesn't see your vision. But what if there's more to what he's feeling? You won't know unless you listen." Min-suk nodded in agreement. "He's right. Ji-yun isn't someone who says what he's really feeling. Something else is going on, something he's not saying." Kyung Hun stopped in his tracks. There was a long pause. Then, without a word, he turned sharply, marched to his horse at the stables, and swung himself up into the saddle. "I'll find him." He rode off with urgency in his posture, dust trailing behind him. Tae-jin sighed in relief, watching the prince disappear down the path. "Thank heavens." Min-suk shook his head. "I thought we'd all suffocate in that tension. I couldn't even blink too loudly." They shared a small laugh, their shoulders finally relaxing now that the storm had passed, for now. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the forest, Ji-yun sat alone at the edge of a gentle stream, nestled beneath the same old tree where he and Jun-ho used to play as children. It was quiet, save for the wind rustling through the leaves and the soft trickle of water. His knees were hugged to his chest, his mind swirling with thoughts too heavy to shake off. The sudden crunch of footsteps made him turn, startled. "Hey," Jun-ho said with a soft smile. "Didn't expect to find you here." Ji-yun blinked. "Jun-ho. Appa told me you were home. I figured you'd want some space, but something told me to check here. Guess I was right." Ji-yun looked away, eyes distant again. Jun-ho approached and sat beside him without asking. "You fought with Kyung Hun?" Ji-yun nodded slowly. "Want to talk about it?" There was a pause. Then Ji-yun spoke, voice low. "He's marrying Min-seo." Jun-ho stiffened. "Wait, what?" Ji-yun nodded again. "To become king. It's all political, of course. He doesn't love her." "Then why does it bother you so much?" Ji-yun exhaled deeply. "Because I know it's not about love. But, it still hurts." He stared at the stream, the water reflecting the ache in his eyes. "Our relationship, everything between us, it was built on a lie. I came to him because I have a hidden agenda. I've been lying to him since the beginning." Ji-yun. "And now," Ji-yun continued, voice cracking, "I look at Min-seo, and I see someone who can give him what I never can. A real family. A future that makes sense." He turned to Jun-ho, raw pain in his gaze. What right do I have to be jealous? If Kyong Hun wanted to marry 100 women, I shouldn't say a thing. I'm not the one who belongs at his side. I'm just the one who's supposed to betray him. For my father. Jiun looked over at Jiun with a quiet determination in his eyes. Jiun, he said softly, you have to tell Kyong Hun the truth. Jiun stiffened, swallowing hard. About everything? Yes, Jiun nodded. Who you really are. What your father is planning. All of it. Jiun lowered his gaze to the ground, voice barely audible. What if he hates me for it? Jiun let out a small breath. He won't. I've seen the way he is with you, Jiun. That kind of love, it's not fragile. It doesn't just disappear because of one truth. He deserves to know. And you deserve the chance to stop carrying this weight alone. There was silence again, and then Jiun chuckled faintly, rubbing the back of his neck. Honestly? I didn't think you'd ever really get over me. Jiun looked up in surprise. Jiun smiled, a little bittersweet. I used to wonder if anyone could ever mean more to you than I did. But watching you with Kyong Hun, he paused, eyes distant. It hurt. Not because I was jealous, okay, maybe I am, but because I realized no one, not even me, will ever love you the way he does. And you love him back. It's deep. It's real. Ji-yun's lips trembled, and the tears he'd been trying so hard to hold back finally spilled down his cheeks. A choked sob escaped him as he tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Jiun didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around him tightly, pulling him into a comforting embrace. Ji-yun clung to him like a lifeline, crying openly now, tears of guilt, fear, love, and grief all tangled together. Meanwhile, in the capital, Sungmin was pacing the small courtyard in front of his home, still trying to process Ji-yun's earlier words, when the loud sound of hooves made him turn sharply. Crown Prince Kyong Hun. He looked like a man on fire, barely waiting for his horse to stop before jumping down. Where is he? He demanded breathlessly. Ji-yun. Is he here? Sungmin's eyes widened. What? No, I don't know. He left a while ago. I haven't seen him since. Kyong Hun's face dropped with visible frustration, but then something clicked. A flicker of realization. I think I know where he is, he muttered, almost to himself, before mounting his horse again and galloping away. The trees whispered in the wind as Kyong Hun reached the clearing, the same one etched into his childhood memories. He slowed his horse as he approached, heart pounding with a strange mix of hope and dread. And then he saw them. Ji-yun, eyes red from crying. And Jiun, arms wrapped tightly around him. They stood there in the golden spill of dusk, oblivious to the world. Ji-yun's head rested on Jiun shoulder like it belonged there. It was a picture that burned into Kyong Hun's eyes before he could even blink. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. The breath caught in his chest, the pain too sharp to name. For a moment, it felt like the ground had tilted beneath him. Thanks for watching. Do like, share and subscribe for more episodes.